Institute's The Division of Responsibility in Child Diabetes by Patty Morse and Ellyn Satter. I'm Carol Danaher, president of the Ellyn Satter Institute. The Ellyn Satter Institute is a not-for-profit organization. The Institute devotes itself to passing on the legacy of Ellyn Satter's feeding dynamics and eating competence models through education, training, and research. We aim to take the stress out of feeding and put the joy back into eating. This is the first time that ESI has charged for its webinars. We want to continue providing you with high-quality webinars. However, ESI is a small organization on a tight budget, and the logistics of setting up and providing webinars are time-consuming and expensive. So we experimented by charging you this time to see if we could defray our expenses. And thank you for your patience as we learned the new payment and registration systems. So ESI wants your feedback now about this charge. So with yet another new procedure, please answer a poll question. Catherine, will you please launch poll question number 1? So go ahead and answer that, and we'll give you a few seconds to make folks were attending. Okay. Catherine, should we close the poll now? I can't tell if people have answered or not. Okay. Our speaker, if you have better ideas for defraying costs of these webinars, please drop us a line at esi@ellensatterinstitute.org. We always like hearing from you. Our speaker today, Patty Morse, is certified by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics as a diabetes educator. She has practiced clinical dietetics for more than 30 years, working in specialty pediatric clinics and in early intervention for children with developmental disabilities. She is currently a nutrition counselor in a trade union-owned HMO clinic. Through her years in practice, Patty has learned that medical nutrition therapy can and must emphasize joyful and confident eating and feeding based on Satter feeding dynamics and eating competence models. Patty finds that using the Satter models transforms her counseling from information giving into conversations that truly help people find ways to manage their eating and their condition that are practical and rewarding. Ellyn Satter has worked with Patty on this presentation. Most of you are familiar with Ellyn. She is an internationally recognized authority on eating and feeding. She will say hello and will chime in during the presentation and Q&A. Thank you, Patty and Ellyn, for donating your time and expertise today to bring us this presentation. 2 housekeeping items for you all. First, please type in your questions at any time for the Q&A session at the end of this presentation. And second, as a result of attending this webinar, you will receive a certificate of participation. The link to that certificate will arrive in an email from GoToWebinar. Patty, I'm turning this over to you now.
Thank you, Carol. And I have to check in. How is my screen? Okay. So I am so happy to be here today and talking about diabetes management and the division of responsibility. I'm thinking that most of you in the audience are already acquainted with the division of responsibility and Ellyn's work. Today I'll be talking about the division of responsibility as an underlying principle of child development. In fact, it's when I switched my thinking to it being a child development principle that I really knew that it had to show up in diabetes clinic. So I think there's no chronic condition quite like diabetes. It requires so many adjustments in so many ways. First of all, the whole family. And then looking at the blood sugars where they are right now and wondering where and adjusting where they're going to go. And it also meant an adjustment in my way of seeing people in clinic and working with families. As diabetes educators, our goal has been to help parents help their children achieve as good as possible glycemic control. There are, however, long-term goals in eating that are more important than the day-to-day blood sugar readings. The diabetes educator is in a key position to help with eating and feeding while maintaining positive feeding relationships. The FD-SATR can help prevent and resolve feeding problems in all children, including the one with diabetes. I now have the opportunity to see adults in clinic, and I think about how they could have been supported as children and perhaps have an even more enjoyable eating in their life.
Okay.
So the division of responsibility. So what was it exactly that made me hesitate to use the model in clinic?
Patty?
Yes.
I was unmuted. This is Ellyn. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad you're here. I was muted, so you had me in an enviable position. I did tell you I was going to say hello and then be quiet, so I want to tell everybody that I'm so happy with this presentation, so carry on. You'll do great things for us.
Well, thank you, Ellyn. So here's my worry list and why I hesitated using Ellyn's model in clinic. And I realized even though I work in a clinic where we had a lot of kids on pumps and a lot of different regimens for insulin, I still had an MPH mentality. I'm still thinking that blood sugars are mostly corrected with eating more, eating less, and worrying a lot about low blood sugar. And I also worried, I would say the next thing that worried me a lot was talking to fellow health professionals who didn't have an understanding or a language in behavioral research, because this is what this is about. I've always given a meal plan in the past, and I always had the idea that I'd improve the family's eating by having the meal plan, the healthy meal plan. But it wasn't supporting the child's process of learning to eat new foods. Now, the green beans is, when a mom told me that they had green beans every night because a child with diabetes ate only green beans, I knew that something had to change. So, as Ellyn says, no child ever ate according to a formula. So the DOR, division of responsibility, is not just for meals. And I'm letting go of getting you or anyone else to do anything my way. What I want to do here is know about your experiences and your thoughts. So please feel free to not only type in questions but comments, and certainly it will be interesting when we have time to discuss at the end. So we will be covering the how of feeding and eating. I remember being puzzled with a mom who asked me after I'd explained a meal plan how she was going to do it. I'd see my job just as nutrition, period. With the division of responsibility, I then had a way of helping with parenting. So what does doable mean? And when we're looking at the DOR allowed me to expand my practice beyond food choices to get to the core of eating issues in diabetes. We know that some early literature when we're thinking about young children and blood sugars and worrying about low blood sugars, that the early literature said that there was a chance of compromised brain function, but we know that isn't true anymore. And my friends who are nurses tell me that I don't need to worry about hypoglycemia as much. But we certainly do think about it. And we know that it's sometimes preventable, often quickly treated, and even expected in good control. The issue comes back to doable. So on the one end with the young kids, we think about low blood sugars, and then this is a great slide. Where are blood sugars? And this slide tells us about the average A1C across ages with 5-year increments. So just follow the flow here. This is under 5. We're following the average A1Cs, and this is what I call the chest high A1Cs between the ages of 15 to 20, and then really coming down in the 20s and leveling out really after 30 years of age. And there are reasons for this. One is the physiological changes with hormonal changes and high blood sugars. There's also the developmentally appropriate considerations that both the child is learning and young adult are learning how to put diabetes practice in their life on their own, and the parent is learning how to turn over responsibilities and still support their child. And then the other question, of course, is eating competency. When we're thinking about goals for blood sugars, we have to think about what also supports the child with eating competency. So I like this, the Canadian goals, because it includes a quality of life, which I think is a huge factor. The child's job is to learn to eat food that the parents eat, and they are born with the ability to eat the right amount of food to grow appropriately. Trusting children's capacities isn't easy either. Parents have to get a grip on their concern about their child's weight and allow children's capability to evolve. So, as you see here, Ellyn deliberately crossed out healthy. I would like you, as you think about this, what comes to mind when you think of healthy? Ellyn suspects that healthy is a barrier, that parents and families think that it means they can't eat the foods that they like. Now, nutrition certainly is very important, but it's the structure that has to get put in place before we focus on that. Get the structure in place, then worry about nutrition as it comes. And of course, we are considering carbohydrate counting as we go through all of this. So often the child with diabetes has lost some weight at the time of diagnosis. Examination of previous growth records is absolutely necessary to understand growth. You really have to look at the trajectory of the growth curve. With control of diabetes and maintaining a division of responsibility in feeding, normal growth really will be restored by the child's own regulatory capacities. So, as I said earlier, to protect children from such interference with trying to get their growth to go a certain direction, the Satter feeding dynamics approach to child overweight redefines overweight as weight acceleration rather than height per weight.
Or a specific position on the growth curve, like over the 85th percentile or over the 95th percentile.
Right. So these are our goals with the feeding dynamics model. And certainly here the difference is that insulin covers the food eaten. Okay, I love this.
Back up, Patty, back up. You went through that one pretty fast, and it's important. So, and I think just if we can just read it and compare it, it gets your point across really well.
So the point here is that we work from the child's abilities and with the parent's support to eat the amount of food that is appropriate. So we see here the conventional model that I certainly was practicing in the beginning, and then that feeding dynamics model where the child regulates with hunger, appetite, and satiety and grows consistently.
So on the one hand, the control, it's controlled using diet. You define the diet and then you match your insulin to it. With the feeding dynamics model, you feed the child and you match the insulin with the child's eating.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
So back to this slide, and it really does two things. First of all, I find a lot of parents don't have an idea of how to put a meal together or may not feel like what they do is right. So I give them this information on how to put a meal together. And even sleep could be added to this meal. The normal reaction to deprivation is overeating, so including dessert frequently helps prevent binge eating on those items. To know they are being successful with feeding, adults have to understand child's normal feeding acceptance behavior. In spite of children's erratic food acceptance behaviors, provided parents do their job with feeding, children do well nutritionally. So what has been your experience when the child does not want to eat what's on the table for dinner?
Okay, stop a minute, back up a little bit and just give them about 10 or 15 seconds to think about that. And that would be fun to hear from them, wouldn't it, Patty? If they...
Yes, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, right. Okay, here I am, shutting up.
Okay. I think they did need more than 2 seconds to answer.
Right.
Okay. There is a message in putting food on the table and letting the child get by rather than having the child make himself a peanut butter sandwich or have the parent cook something else. You can make do. That's one message to the child. Another one, you will come along with your eating. Structured snacks are necessary for growing children and adolescents. In fact, it really supports dinners. Planning them ahead is beneficial for the parent to support eating. At snack time, children also need to eat to hunger. And this is another question for the audience. How do you handle the snack times with insulin? It's tempting, isn't it, to pressure. All parents worry about their kids, and even more so, parents whose child has diabetes feels an urgency sometimes about their eating. So
Back up just a bit. Once again, there's a lot of research that supports this point. A number of people are looking at relationships between parents and children, and for each of these words there's quite a bit of research support. So it is an important basic principle of the feeding dynamics model. Is this bothering you, Patty?
oh no, I think this is great.
Okay. All right.
I find that really helpful. Thank you, Ellyn.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And this is particularly worrisome about how unpredictable kids are, especially if you look at just one meal, and especially if your child has diabetes.
Mm-hmm. And that's why, because they are, again, backing up a little bit, one slide, that's why you want to chase the food with the insulin rather than give a big thing of insulin and then be scared the child's not going to eat.
Right, and especially for young children, that's true.
Yeah. Okay.
So getting a child to make errors in regulation requires relentless effort. You have to give him more to eat than he really wants to eat, not only day after day, meal after meal. It has to be a concerted effort. If you overfeed a child normally, the child would eat less the next time or not be so hungry. Research about food selection and feeding behavior always has to be interpreted in the light of child development and feeding dynamics principles. It rarely is. Roll's portion size study found that preschoolers could be induced to eat more by large portion sizes while toddlers could not. This article is widely cited as to indicate that children past a certain age cannot regulate food intake. Not true. Large portions alone won't make preschoolers overeat, but pressure to eat with any portion size does, because they want to please and can be shamed into doing adults' bidding. You can't do it. You can't do that with a toddler, and that's certainly true. Toddlers are so committed to being their own people that they would rather fight than eat. So meals are so important. And this is for all children again, and certainly for children with diabetes, that having that comfort in knowing that there's a regular schedule of meals and knowing that I can eat the right amount now because I won't be starving later if a meal is late. When you know the parent is holding up his part in providing regular meals and snacks and observing the division of responsibility, you can reassure them. And this is a quick sentence in clinic. It doesn't take a lot of time. So in promoting family meals, you will have lots of support. The research is clear about the benefits of family meals. There are a number of citations in your annotated reference list that help you find this research. And of course, you could also do a web search. There's a lot of information out there. You will see that public health and education programming is focusing on family meals, and that a number of businesses and their message is certainly family meals. So parenting with food. We're shifting now into to parenting, which Ellyn's work has been a great support to me in clinic. And so we think about what parenting is and the parenting styles. And this just helps me so much. So Ellyn Satter's approach is authoritative. Doesn't this say it all in parenting styles? As a diabetes educator, our goal has been to help parents help their children achieve as good as possible glycemic control. And so, again, we are looking at the big picture here and having competent eating for life. So we have to be careful about how we approach this. The diabetes educator is in a key position to help with eating and feeding while maintaining a positive feeding relationship. So FDSATR can help prevent and resolve feeding problems in all children, including the one with diabetes. So this is always sticky business. What is the solution with forbidden foods? Not giving children unlimited access to these foods, not good DOR, division of responsibility. Instead, give children access to these foods within the context of the DOR. Regularly have potato chips along with the lunchtime sandwiches. Offer enough so that there are potato chips left over. Limit cookies at meal times to a single child-sized portion so they don't compete with the meal. However, at snack time, put out a plate of cookies with some milk. Again, put out enough so that there's enough left over, which really supports the sense of not being deprived. So, people come to diabetes feeling deprived. So when they get the diagnosis, the first thing that they think of is the foods they can't eat. The word moderation even, which we use a lot, just screams cutting back on eating. So starting with the foods the family eats is a good place to be. Rather than seeing their good-tasting foods as a problem, understanding these foods contribute to satisfaction with the meal and lower the chance of disinhibition. And disinhibition is like, oh, I ate this food is a bad food, so I'll just throw in the towel and eat anything. It's important to know my own particular preferences with family meals, and I came to discover that I had made progress with the feeding dynamics when I could bless all foods, including the Southern breakfast. So what about beverages? I didn't know when a woman newly diagnosed with diabetes told me that she drank 10 cans of Coke a day and wasn't about to change to focus on meal and snack pattern rather than food selection. Drinking along to be able to continue working without stopping was only part of the problem. The bigger problem was feeling the worthiness of self-care and providing meals and snacks for herself. Stopping work, sitting down and eating a regular meal while tasting and enjoying a soda and drinking water in between might have changed her blood sugars without a sense of deprivation. Whatever it is, making an experiment makes it easier to consider because it isn't a mandate. People have to find their own way with beverages. I discovered that a beverage can mean as much to someone as their favorite food. And what about that 2-liter bottle of soda that comes with pizza? What are we to do about that? And this is a question for the audience. I'm very curious. This is 2 cooking shows. On the left, one dramatically high and rich, and that's on the left, and on the right is an extremely low-fat, high-fiber selection. It's about really, in the end, how we combine foods at mealtime. If the family has kept or established good structure with meals, then we can expand to nutrition information. So then we come to comorbidities. So here we are with comorbidities, and we're thinking about how after the family has established the structure that we can work with the nutrition information, expand to other areas of nutrition.
I have something I want to say about comorbidity, Patty.
Yes.
And that is that you've talked about eating competence and supporting the child in developing eating competence. Well, the eating competence research in adults, which doesn't say anything about what foods to eat or not eat in order to, postpone comorbidities. Eating competent people show far better health indicators than those who are not eating competent. And so, we're thinking in terms of positive attitudes about eating, food acceptance skills, the ones you pointed out, food regulation skills, and structure. Working carefully to provide one with a consistent and reliable context for eating. And the research is extremely promising in this area, in fact more promising than the research that has investigated looking at eating or avoiding certain foods.
Oh, thank you, Ellyn. Yes, I think that's really important information. I'm glad you explained that. So, as diabetes educators, our goal has been to help parents and help their children achieve as good as possible glycemic control. So again, we come back, and I know I've shown this slide several times, but it's so important of what we can do in clinic with supporting families with their eating. So this is a beautiful slide. Did you want to comment on that, Ellyn?
No, I just wanted to know that the audience is, we're getting some comments that the slides are being progressed a little too quickly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for reminding.
Yeah, that's all I wanted to let you know.
Okay.
Okay.
So why don't you back up then, just one. You have shown it many times before, but I agree with you. This is an excellent slide. Okay.
So this slide is great because it talks about how we turn over responsibility both with food management and diabetes care from parent to child. And you'll notice here that really in this age group the child becomes more able, and we're going to show some slides coming up on this, to participate in diabetes care. And it isn't until late in adolescence, that the two intersect, the parent and the child's participation in diabetes care. So the parents' responsibilities gradually decrease but don't stop completely. And the child's abilities and skills increase. And this is so important in how we stepwise turn things over. I find lots of times that parents will have their child will be a teenager and they'll think, oh, it's time to turn things over. So we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Mm-hmm. Right, and Patty, I think that graph says quite a bit about nutrition education as well, because essentially the children who are in these earlier grades, certainly toddlers and preschoolers, but also in the earlier grades in school, are not cognitively ready to learn principles of food selection and apply those principles. So, it really doesn't help to teach them diet when they are that young. In fact, it doesn't even help to teach food composition. I think you're going to say something about this in a little while, because it goes in one ear and out the other, or, they can parrot the lesson, but they really can't apply it. It's only when they get on toward 12, 13 years old that they begin to think abstractly, which is what you really need, and in order to be able to teach principles like food composition and menu planning in order to support their diabetes.
So we're moving on to talk more about that shift. And like you said, Ellyn, when children really have the cognitive ability to make some decisions. So I love Ellyn's description here of growing up, actually, and how parents support that. So challenge without overwhelming, provide support without controlling, and give independence without abandoning. And this really holds true for diabetes. So these slides I am going to go through quite fast. They're a good reference. They're from Peter Chase's Understanding Diabetes, and it has been such a guide to me in having an idea of what a child might be ready for at different stages. So the parent of a young child really has to read the child all the time. Sleepy, hungry, low blood sugar, and how much things change, even if a nap time changes or the child starts to walk or all kinds of things. So we have to think about this as the parent at this stage, of course, doing all the care, but doing a very good job at reading the child. And I've heard so many times about from parents that they could just look at their child and look at their child's eyes and know that it was blood sugar and not a temper tantrum. So when the parent is matter of fact and just saying, you know, with the sense of we have to do this, and loving, the child is accepting. And I've seen so many cute little fingers just, they put their hand out and ready for a blood test.
And shots as well, that they don't get upset about their shots.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a description from one of the nurses I work with. From one of her kids that she helped with, is the head feels like a bubble. So it's good to have an expression to use for hypoglycemia so that parents know that their child is feeling low. Even though they can't use the word, they can describe how they feel. So the parent and child alike become teachers for life.
Yeah, and as you said in that previous slide, they're unable to recognize it, but one of the mastery expectations is that the child becomes more self-aware and is able to begin to recognize the symptoms of hypoglycemia.
And so oh, sorry.
What you say here, you knows how much. The child doesn't do this cognitively or intellectually. They intuit how much. They just do it. They eat, and then they stop eating, and that's how much they eat. So it's not a cognitive process.
Right.
Right.
So in this slide, I have repeated over and over again that the child is unable to understand the implications of eating, blood sugar tests, and insulin. And I do this because sometimes we want to keep explaining to children, and really doing is the greatest teacher.
You said it much better than I did.
And there's such a big shift when kids start school. So that is a big change, and I think about a father talking about how he followed the school bus from a distance so he could just watch his child going to school.
Oh, gosh.
So kids at this age may even amaze you at what they can quote 4 grams of carbohydrate, but just like Ellyn was saying, they cannot apply it. Diabetes is so complex and so many things to consider when you're thinking about management.
All right, Patty, at this kid, this 5 to 8 years of age, do they begin to be self-aware enough at this point that they can recognize hypoglycemia?
Yes, at this age they some people say, even as low as 5, that they might be able to experience it and be able to tell their parent. I always think of a 5-year-old at Chuck E. Cheese that went low and made it back to the table, and his parents knew that he needed to have more to eat.
He headed for help.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. And actually, this age is moving into puberty. Puberty happens, somewhere between 8 and 14, and there is a downward trend in younger kids going into puberty. And there are a couple of issues here, and one is that there are great changes in management with diabetes with puberty, and also kind of the change in interest. And there's a huge difference between being 8 and being 12. So we're thinking about this also as an age where dieting may start, and that's why we've commented on parents and how they talk about their own body and eating. And it also starts a time that it gets trickier and trickier in knowing how to interact with your child in management of diabetes. So one thing that parents need to know see that my slides are in it. So we actually talked about the youth. So like I said, I see the time, and it is 12:42, and so I am going to speed up a bit on the developmental part, and I would like you to refer to that, because like I said, the Peter Chase's descriptions have been very helpful to me in my practice. One interesting question to ask at this age if they're newly diagnosed is, who knows you have diabetes? And it's really important to be very clear on expectations between parents and kids on who's going to do what. The 12 to 15-year-old is capable of doing more, but the parent has to be connected in knowing what's going on and being involved. This is Ellyn's description of the late teen years, that the parent gives privileges and autonomy as the teen becomes skilled and responsible. So that talks a lot about how the parent and teen interact in diabetes care. The older teen and getting ready for a grand transition out of the home. And several of the slides also mention, as Ellyn has mentioned, about food management and kids. One of the survival skills of kids, all kids, would be to be able to make 3 basic meals for themselves and know how to put a meal together. So this is parenting the adolescent with diabetes. So the parents of the child with good control. There was a study done by Anderson. Barbara Anderson has done a lot of work with diabetes, and Ellyn, she's a psychologist, right?
I believe so, yes.
And so what she sees in parents of kids were with good control, and I apologize for saying good. We try not to say that in clinic.
Oh, I'm the one who made the slide, so my bad. What should I say?
I think we know what good control is. but maintaining the parents keeping their leadership. And respectfully and warmly interacting with the child, and coming along with turning things over as a child moves toward independence. And giving realistic mastery opportunities and expectations. And what we see is that's different with families, and we all know this in clinic. The families that are having a hard time are families that are having a hard time. And so the parenting style may be the parenting style that is not helpful in helping the child, and helping the child in particular with diabetes. And this is the common theme that Barbara found also, is that the family perceives diabetes management as burdensome, and that the parents wish that the child would take care of his diabetes. Mm-hmm. So do you have any other comments on that, Ellyn?
Yeah, the last email that you all got about the webinar showed you where the handouts were, and that's Patty's PowerPoint for this presentation. And there's also a short article that I wrote that has references on this topic, parenting the adolescent with diabetes. So you can dig into the topic there.
So the Satter feeding dynamics model with diabetes is supporting the child's capabilities and using all the technology and the new types of insulin that we have available today. I've got my head out of my MPH mentality, and to make that work. I remember talking to a dietitian working with the DCCT trials, and she said, we just want to see what works. And so I think lots of times it's such a good teaching opportunity and problem solver when we check blood sugars and work backwards and see what happens, even with soda and pizza or whatever. And then we can decide what we want to do with that information. So what you know still applies. So for the dietitian, we still do menu planning, we still talk about food composition, and we certainly talk a lot about carbohydrate counting, but it's how we present that information and how we support the parent to support the child, and then also with the older child to support the child with his eating.
Nice.
So our goal is to raise a resilient child. And what we want to see here with our resilient child is not only is she able to manage her diabetes, but the diabetes doesn't get in the way of any of her goals for life. And also that she enjoys eating and is very comfortable and happy with her enjoyment of eating, and that it all comes into place in her life, that it doesn't stop her from anything. So this closes up the presentation, and we will be moving to the question and answer period. I'm going to turn this over. Before I close, Ellyn, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think you did great. We were going to give them the poll question about, it's number 2 poll question at this point. So this is Catherine, you're on. Can you launch that for them, please? It's too bad we can't vote because we don't see, and then it's hard to know how it's supposed to work, right? So, okay, that I think is long enough. And I think you need, Catherine, if you'll get that down so we can see Patty's slide. There you go. Do you have another slide that Carol was going to show? Okay.
So this is our join us slide.
Okay. So it's now time for Q&A. And let me see. Were you going to talk now?
Well, let me just say a few words while you're getting the Q&A going up. This is Carol again. And while the transition to Q&A is happening, Patty, thank you for this very relevant and excellent presentation. And to you, the audience, on behalf of the Ellyn Satter Institute, I invite you to join us. And there's a number of ways to do this. You can become a friend and donor of ESI. And I just remind you that all donations are tax deductible. And as an affiliate or associate, there's an application process. It's also on our website. You are mentored and become an active part of ESI. And each of these ways reflects the many ways that we appreciate you and really value our connection with you. Okay, Patty and Ellyn, hopefully questions, the Q&A can start now.
Okay.
Great. Okay, the first question is, what if a child with diabetes only wants to eat carbohydrate foods?
So that's an interesting question because so often carbohydrate foods are kind of the surefire food at a meal, and I think I'd probably be more worried if they didn't eat any carbohydrate foods. You know, we see when foods are presented on the table without pressure, and so the environment has a lot to do with as much as what foods are on the table, that the child is going to come along with their eating. So I think we just continue with the division of responsibility and presenting a variety of foods like we talked about the meal plan, and having those foods on the table and keeping the faith.
Okay, super. The next question, how do you apply the Satter method when intake of certain foods does need to be limited? For instance, food allergies or potassium restriction in CKD.
I think a lot has to do with how we present food at a meal, that we really stack the foods in our favor. And you know, I am acquainted with an dietitian that works with allergies that is part of the Ellyn Satter Institute group meetings. And she said it was very clear with allergies because it's so straightforward. You talk about safety, and you offer foods that are safe, and the child eats as much of those foods as he or she is ready for once at that meal.
Okay. The next question, the person says, to carb count, I either use measuring cups or weighing food with carb factors. Do you find that the act of having to weigh and measure the food negatively impacts implementing SDOR?
Boy, that's a good question. And it is, I think that may be a skill that's helpful. We certainly, to be able to count carbohydrate, we have to know how much is on the plate. But we also work backwards by, if we work with measuring cups in the beginning, we get a really good idea of how much is on the plate. And for the younger child, we can give the insulin afterwards and think about what's left on the plate, or think about if there were seconds. So I think that's a good question. What do you think about
Patty,
that?
don't people start out with weighing or measuring just to train themselves about how much of this produces that much carbohydrate? And so, you know, it's such a sort of a moving target anyway. You have a rough balance. It's not a real precise balance between carbohydrate and insulin, so you have a sort of general idea about how much carbohydrate the child eats from estimating it, and then you match your insulin to that. And so, yeah, I think if you keep weighing and measuring forever, it's pretty, it could end up being, you could end up forcing or restricting. But if you weigh and measure to teach yourself and then estimate after that, then you can be much more free-flowing. What do you think? Does that make sense to you, Patty?
Yes, that makes sense to me. Absolutely.
All right.
Super. The next question, do you have any suggestions when kids need to eat something to treat a low BS that does not correlate with a meal or snack time? Any pointers to keep in mind as far as DOR?
Oh, I know. I like Ellyn's description of this situation as medicine. And one of the nurses I work with say, kids know how crummy it feels to have a low blood sugar, so they're probably going to drink. And juice is really great because juice goes in fast. It doesn't have to be something you like. The only problem I've seen is sometimes kids get a little certainly cranky and even sometimes not willing to go along with things when their blood sugars are really low and they can't think straight. But most of the time, for most of the times with hypoglycemia, it's just a matter of having something quick right now. It isn't the child that has gotten so low.
Yeah, I think it's really useful for diabetes and perhaps some other chronic conditions to introduce the concept of food as medicine and to make the distinction between the two, because when food is medicine, the child doesn't have any choice. He has to get it down. When food is food, then you revert to the division of responsibility. And of course, once you establish the concept of food as medicine and you insist the child take it in, it's really tempting to use that with food as food. But you have to be really careful not to. You have to keep that concept very carefully isolated from the way you use food with just regular feeding and meals and snacks.
Great. Do we have time for one more question, or do you want to wrap it up there?
Well, people are hanging in there pretty well. Can we do our last poll really quickly? That's our evaluation poll. And then let's do that last question after.
Okay.
So if you'll launch poll number 3, Catherine. Okay, well, why don't you start reading it, Catherine, and then you can take it down after you get done reading it.
Okay, so the last question, if we are matching insulin to food rather than taking insulin for predicted food intake, how would you take insulin action rates into account?
That's really nicely put.
Oh, that was so nice. Well, I'll tell you that I was amazed because I've been working with adults with type 2 for a while, so I went to talk to my friend who, one works with starting pumps and the other manages a clinic, and she said, Patty, blood sugars go to 300 and 400 if you give insulin after a meal. And what her solution was, if things tend to be unpredictable with that child, is to at least give some insulin before the meal and make up depending on what the child eats afterwards. But you are absolutely right. If insulin is given after a meal, the blood sugars go a lot higher. That fast-acting insulin isn't as fast as we thought, and we have the continuous glucose monitor that really tells us a lot of things that we didn't know before. That's a great question.
Yeah, it is.
And maybe you would have some ideas, too, on what could be done in that way of things that you've tried.
Mm-hmm. Well, and yes, and one of the things that didn't show up on Carol's handy-dandy slide, and would you take down the poll question, please, Catherine? Okay, so I don't see the ESI Clinical Issues Facebook page. But if you want to continue your conversation, and we would love to hear from you in conversation, just do a search, sort of Google ESI Clinical Issues Facebook, and that should bring up ESI ClinIS, and we would love to have you. It's a closed group. It's for professionals. For those of you who are non-professionals, you can join up with the regular Facebook group. But the clinical Facebook group, you have to be invited to join, or I have to sort of click you into the discussion. But we would love to hear you. All right, so before I started going on about that, we had 2 minutes left, and we're out of time, aren't we, Patty?
We are out of time, but would love to hear from people.
Clinical issues on our website at the link to this presentation. Bye-bye.
Okay.